Hi, folks. Welcome back to another episode of the Podcast Digest. As always, I want to thank you. Yes, you personally who's listening to my voice right now for taking the time to listen. Without you and your support, this ride wouldn't have been as spectacular to be on as this one is, and I very much appreciate you sharing the show with your friends, with your family, with your followers on Twitter, and all that good fun stuff. For this week's show, I'm taking a break from sort of the long established shows and hosts I've been talking to a lot here lately to tell you about a fairly new show that I'm pretty sure you're going to be hearing about for a long time to come. Just remember you heard it here first on the Podcast Digest. The name of the show is Nocturne, and it's described by its creators as essay radio, a hybrid form of audio storytelling that blends elements of documentary fiction and sound art. And I think it's a very apt description and one you truly need to hear to experience. To talk about why I feel that you should be subscribing to the show, I consider myself lucky to be joined by one of the show's creators and its host, Vanessa Lowe. Vanessa, welcome to the Podcast Digest.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you for joining me. I recently found about your show. You reached out and told me I needed to check this out, and I immediately did, and immediately blasted through all the episodes currently in iTunes and have thoroughly enjoyed everything I've heard so far. But before we talk about Nocturne, can you tell us and the listeners a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure. Well, in my former life, I was a clinical psychologist and a musician, and those two things overlapped. I'm a singer, songwriter, guitarist, and about 7 or 8 years ago, I started fiddling around with making a radio piece and discovered that I loved it, and that it kind of blended the two other major things I'd done, psychology and songwriting, into this awesome new configuration. And so it kind of uses all the skills I've had for other things, and I just fell in love with producing radio. So I've kind of been doing mostly that. I actually also discovered that I love editing and Pro Tools. I love editing sound. So I started doing some editing work also for other people. But yeah, so it was just a complete kind of detour in my life.
And you've done a number of things. I was exploring your website beforehand. You have links to some radio documentaries that you've done before. Tell us a little bit about those, and I'll tell you about the one that I've heard.
Okay, so, well, let's see. About 3 or 4 years ago, how should I start? I did a sort of 1 hour, my first thing ever was this big 1 hour documentary that was very self-taught, and it was a lot of fun, but it was extremely hard. And I realized around that time that I needed to learn how to do it. So I found this really experienced audio radio producer in the Bay Area named Claire Schoen, and she was offering a workshop on basically how to produce long form radio documentary from the beginning to the end. And I took her workshop and immediately thought, I have to work with this woman. It turned out she was looking for an intern, and I became her intern on this project called RISE, Climate Change and Coastal Communities, and eventually became an associate producer on the project and worked with her for 2 years, which was basically my radio education. I consider it like going to college for radio. She's just such an experienced, awesome radio producer and mentor, and I kind of learned almost everything about how to produce radio with her. Around the same time, I produced a half-an-hour radio documentary called Beat Peddler, which is about a Bay Area rapper, inventor, educator. He makes bike-powered smoothie machines, bike-powered blenders, and it was really music-rich. And I did that. And then shortly after I finished working with Claire on RISE, I hooked up with a woman who was a recent transplant to the Bay Area named Megan Jones, who was coming from Nashville, I think Nashville. And she had an idea for, she wasn't quite sure what she wanted to do with it, but she wanted to do something involving, something with radio about Polaroid. And she had fallen in love with Polaroid photography. And we got together and really hit it off. And I thought this would be a really fun project. And I hadn't really collaborated with just somebody that wasn't super, super experienced, had been doing it forever. And so we embarked on this project, which eventually we realized had a lot of meat to it. So it became a 1 hour documentary about Polaroid and our digital connections all sort of photography and how we connect through visual images from Polaroid to Instagram. And so that took a while, and that had really good success. It's been distributed kind of all over the country on public radio stations. It had its debut on WNYU in New York, and it's played all over the place. So that was really fun.
And that's the one I heard, and I listened to that today. A Modern Polaroid Love Story. Folks, I will be linking this up in the show notes as well if you would like to check this out. It is definitely worth your time, and it was extraordinarily interesting. And I think, even though I personally am not a Polaroid user, can actually remember my parents and grandparents using the Polaroid camera, it was really interesting to find out how many people are still using it, how many people still have a passion for it. I went through to the, let's see if I can remember this, PolaroidSF.com. I went through that site with the journal daily, one shot a day from a Polaroid camera that those gentlemen are keeping. Really interesting piece. How did you guys come up or sort of zero in on that as a 1 hour radio documentary?
Yeah, at first we really weren't sure what it should be and how long we kind of thought, well, what gets played on public radio? Megan hadn't ever done radio before and was kind of in the mindset of starting small, but she had met Billy and Bruce of Polaroid SF on these Polaroid walks that she had done. So she'd come to San Francisco and had been walking by a photography store and saw this vintage Polaroid and fell in love with it. And so she sort of made contact with a bunch of other people that did these photography walks. They would just take Polaroid cameras out around San Francisco and take pictures together and then come back and drink beer. And so she had also met some other people that were involved in kind of the movement to bring Polaroids kind of back and keep them around because Polaroid kind of was at risk of sort of disappearing. And actually, it's still at risk of disappearing. But anyway, so I kind of, we just sort of saw what we had. She knew some people, and then I was really fortunate. My partner works in film, and I said, who can we contact who has some connection to Polaroid? And I looked around, and I realized Gus Van Sant has used Polaroids in a lot of his film work, and he actually had a couple of books published of his Polaroids. He used them when he was storyboarding movies, and he would when he was doing casting. So made a bunch of phone calls and did emails, and I got Gus Van Zant's email address, and I sent him this cold email saying, "This is what we're doing. It'd be really great to interview." And he just emailed back just with one line that said, "That sounds like fun." So I was like, okay, does that mean we can do it? And so he said yes. And Megan and I got in the car and we drove from the Bay Area up to Portland and interviewed him. And then once we had Gus Van Sant and we just kind of got more and more, we went to the UC Berkeley campus and we interviewed a whole bunch of, young college students and got their views about digital photography and Polaroid instant photography. And it was so interesting because, for such a wide group of people, ages and different walks of life, there are so many incredibly nostalgic and rich memories that people had of their experiences, even if Polaroid wasn't even being made yet anymore. Some of these 17-year-olds just had all these incredibly vivid memories of using their parents' Polaroid cameras. And so it just kind of blossomed, and we kind of started to realize, at first it was just going to be about Polaroid. And then we realized, this is still so poignant and so current, and so much about Polaroid informed digital photography today and how instant photography is being used today. And so we kind of wanted to look at how is it similar and how is it evolved. And it just kind of became this 1 hour thing.
And you had a segment there talking about Instagram, if I recall correctly. And I think a lot of the filters that are built into so many of our iOS and Android apps, the photo editing apps, at least there's always one or two that you can see very clearly have taken cues from the Polaroid days to kind of reproduce the effect.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's really interesting. It's just really kind of wedged itself deep into our visual culture. And I love it. I have to admit, like my partner has a freezer in the bottom of our house with old vintage Polaroid film. And it's just, it's always in there. And
that's what I was going to ask. After working on this project or during, did you go out and try to get a hold of a Polaroid camera and take this up yourself?
I already had a Polaroid camera.
Oh, okay.
And my partner has like about 5 of them. So
this was a passion project.
It's all over our house. Yeah, because, really, there's just nothing like original Polaroid film, and there's a group called the Impossible Project, which has been remanufacturing the film, because when Polaroid went out of business, the film went away. It couldn't be made anymore. And so the Impossible Project has been re-engineering it, and they're doing a fantastic job. It's really amazing. However, there's just nothing like a picture that was taken on original Polaroid film. It just glows from the inside, and it just brings you back to the experiences that you had, and it just kind of infuses all this magic into the image. So I still love them.
And I love the hat tip right at the beginning of that special there, where you guys, mentioned the Outkast song and lyrics and kind of go into why that's not even really necessary anymore. But
right.
I like that because I think a lot of younger people are probably going to recollect the song maybe more so than the cameras themselves.
We wanted to use that song too, but of course, licensing.
Yeah. Licensing. So that was 2014, if I'm reading everything correctly.
I think that's right.
So how did we move from there into Nocturne?
So when I finished that project, I just sort of took a little breather, and I knew I wanted to kind of do something that was going to be ongoing. I really liked what was happening with podcasts. I'm a songwriter, and I love sort of just having a project, finishing it, going on to the next project, but doing an hour-long radio documentary, it's a real labor. I mean, it's really fun, but podcasting seemed a little bit more kind of rough and tumble, a little less precious. And so then I was just kind of thinking for a long time about what I might want to. I remember Claire, I think it was Claire at one point, said to me, if you're going to make a long form documentary, it has to be about something that you're super interested in, because at some point it's going to be a slog. And if you don't love what you're doing, it's just going to be pretty hellish. So I just was spending a lot of time thinking about like, what topic can I have that's going to maintain my interest and help me kind of make it through the times that are inevitably going to be, just more grunt work than anything. And, I had a bunch of ideas, but nothing really stuck. And over the past several years in particular, I've had insomnia. I've just had, just different experiences at night that I've been focusing on and talking about. And my husband, Kent, who's also the co-creator, he looked at me we were having some conversation. He said, of course, that's what your podcast should be about. It should be about nighttime, because I'm not a night owl, and it's like an endless process of discovery for me, and endlessly interesting, and also foreboding, and it's got just a ton of energy for me personally. And so I don't know, we had that conversation, and I knew it just kind of clicked, like, of course, this is what I'll do. This is what I'll focus on. Because not only is it really interesting to me, but it can also be a process of maybe developing more comfort with the night, and maybe just getting to know a place that I'm not that familiar with. Because by 9 o'clock, my brain is starting to kind of wind down, and it's just, night is not a place that I've naturally inhabited.
So you've got this idea. You and your husband have decided here is a potential subject matter, topic, if you will, for framework for the podcast.
Yeah. And
how then do you translate from that idea into beginning to assemble what we now see here in iTunes?
So it's just a notebook with many pages. Which after seeing Miranda July recently, I've converted now to the notes on my iPhone.
Right.
It's gotten unruly. But that was another thing. It's like, we had the idea, and, really it didn't feel like a certain thing until I was able to sit down and go, oh my God, I'm never going to run out of ideas. At first I thought, well, it's a limited topic. How am I going to sustain this? As soon as I started writing down ideas, it was just obvious to me that it could go a million places, and they were all interesting. And they were all also relatively untapped for the most part. And I've heard some things about aspects of the night, but I've never come across sort of a full-fledged, comprehensive exploration of the night, and in its positive, kind of expansive, transcendent aspects, in addition to the spooky, kind of anxious, insomniac elements of it.
Well, in the first 5 episodes, you kind of are all over that spectrum as well, and it's clear within that first 5, and for anybody who may have had those initial hesitations, that there is just this wealth of subject matter that you can take sort of each episode in. And some of them have really stuck with me over the past, 7 to 10 days that I've worked through them all. And there's and I don't want to necessarily ruin it for anyone per se, but I do want to highlight a few things that I saw in there. I think it's episode 4, Alter Hours, with the woman who basically had a condition that forces her to maintain alternative sleeping hours, and ended up working from home and trying to maintain a relationship and live in a world that basically functions differently than she naturally does.
Yeah.
How did that story come together? Like, how do you find somebody who's experiencing this type of thing and set about producing this episode?
Yeah, I mean, what I've been finding is that the best way to gather stories is just talk about the podcast to everybody. So the way that one came about is I was at the Third Coast radio conference in Chicago a few months ago. I guess it was several months ago now. And I was taking a break from all the activities, and I was sitting in this lobby area talking to another producer. And I was just telling her about Nocturne. And she said, "Oh, I have a friend who's nocturnal," just sort of in passing. And I went, "You do? Really? Would you mind putting us in touch or giving her, my contact info?" And then I didn't hear from her for a couple of weeks, and I just emailed her again. She was in Boston, and she contacted Amanda, the subject of that story, and she was into it. And she hadn't actually talked about it to people before, but she was sort of feeling ready to come out with her nocturnal being. And so that was just, it was just like kind of luck, but also just putting it out there. So I'm just talking to everybody I possibly can. And so some of it, I came up with all these ideas. I put them in my notebook. But what's actually happened is that the stories so far have mostly been not in my notebook. They're just people hearing about it and going, "Oh, I have this story," and kind of offering them, which is amazing.
And that's obviously makes life a lot easier to be able to come up with these type of things for sure. And some of the folks you've featured on in terms of been kind of telling their tale have been wonderful storytellers themselves. Yeah. Now, I'm sure the actual editing and assembly process, I imagine, I'm going to speculate, these are hours of interviews cut down to the episode length. Once you begin to have a subject and they've agreed to talk to you, is this just about hitting a recorder and just having a conversation and see where it goes, or how does this work?
Well, I generally call people up or talk to them in person and do kind of a mini pre-interview and just ask some basic questions to see if it's a potential story, like if there's really going to be something in it that's going to be interesting. And then, then we either sit down, or like in Amanda's case, she has a USB mic that she hooked up to her computer and recorded herself into GarageBand while we talked on the phone. She's in Cambridge, Massachusetts. That or in person, we just talk. Yeah. And then I edit it down. It's interesting though, because it's not nearly as much tape as when I'm producing, sort of like when we produced Shake It. That was, hours and hours and hours of tape. This isn't as much. And also these can be any length, which is so amazing. They could be 5 minutes or they could be half an hour. It's just like whatever the story wants to be is how long it can be. So it's great.
Yeah, and speaking of length, if again, memory serves me, I believe the most recent one, episode 5, A Hole in the Night, that was the longest, if I recall correctly. I think so. I could be wrong. Don't quote me on that one. But that was the conversation with the nighttime truck driver, correct?
Yeah.
Yes. And for folks who haven't heard that one yet, tell them a little bit about what they'll hear when they subscribe.
For A Hole in the Night?
Yeah.
So, Al Wilkinson was a truck driver for 28 years, and in Oregon, and he preferred the night shift because it sort of gave him time to think, and he liked the scenery and the quiet. And it was very peaceful. And on a dark, rainy night in winter in Oregon near Roseburg on I-5, something dramatic happened. I don't want to say too much more, but there's a very dramatic thing that happened, which, I think I emphasized a fair amount with the music and sound design. But then he has a very surprising to me take on what happened. And it all revolves around trucking, which was so much fun because that's just a world that I know nothing about.
And nor do I. And it was an education for me to hear from a gentleman who's obviously spent so much of his life in that world, especially doing it at night, and what that is like lifestyle wise, even.
Yeah. And I think the other thing for me was, I mean, I have a huge respect for what truck drivers have to do for their work, but I also, after doing this story, I also have sort of a healthy fear, I think, of these trucks, and realizing, I mean, we all take our chances when we're in an automobile on the road, but I don't think I knew, like, I always kind of get scared when I'm on a freeway next to a bunch of trucks, but now I'm really like, oh, yeah.
Yeah, understandably. And folks, listen to that episode, and I think you'll understand as well. You mentioned sound design in that episode, and sound is a big deal in every episode of Nocturne so far. What is this process like when you are designing the sound, when you are assembling all of that? It sounds like it's sort of its own entity within the show.
Yeah, it kind of is, and I'm really fortunate. So my co-creator of Nocturne, Kent Sparling, who's also my partner, he does sound design for film, and he's also a composer. So while I've used music from many different people with their permission, also Kent is sort of the resident composer for Nocturne. So that's amazing because he has got a catalog of music, but also he enjoys composing for films or other projects. So I can say, oh, I'm doing this episode on, a woman who stays up all night, or on a baker who saw something dramatic in the woods at night. And we'll talk a little bit, and he'll jot down some notes and ask me for some emotional ideas, and then he'll just go compose something. So in that, I have this amazing resource. And then the other resource that I have because of Kent is that he's got an unbelievably amazing sound library. Just everything from outside ambiances to some of the trucks, all the trucks in A Hole in the Night, he had recorded before for other projects. And so some of the sounds I'll record myself if I know I need them, and they're pretty easily attainable. But oftentimes, Kent will have it in this library, and so I have access to a huge amount of material. So, and then for me, I love the story element of creating these episodes, but I also just really love, like I said, the songwriting element of it, kind of creating a sonic world and a musical world, and editing music and building the kind of sound world behind the stories, or interwoven with the stories, is part of what's really fun and exciting for me. So yeah, it's a huge part of Nocturne.
That's an excellent partnership. I'll tell you, I've spoken with a lot of podcast hosts and creators, and a couple, actually. One that comes to mind, Kyle Jest from The Labs, does a sort of a similar vein product, I guess you could call it, a show type that you guys are putting out, and he is literally a one-man band, and he described the effort that goes into it, and it's extraordinary. And I imagine the effort that you guys go through are just as much, if not more. It must be a wonderful, beneficial what's the word I'm looking for? To have access to somebody so talented and so willing to help and be a part of what you're creating.
Yeah, well, I've been taking advantage of him for years. He's also produced several of my records of music, and so we discovered early on that we work really well creatively together. And we don't spend a lot of time bickering, just sometimes about the collaborations, but mostly we have a lot of fun. Yeah, so it's incredible, and he's so generous, and fortunately it's also fun for him. So, and he's been in my band, and so.
Does he have any interest in hosting an episode?
Wow, we haven't talked about it.
Really? I'm surprised that hasn't come up. Just, as maybe even a one-off,
That would be fun.
It'd be interesting.
That would be really interesting. Yeah.
Just jumped into my head, and I was like, an alternative perspective for an episode.
Radio voice. Actually, we were out to dinner recently, and some person that was sitting next to us actually said, excuse me, are you a host on KQED? And he was like, no, she's the radio person.
Well, if you guys haven't talked about it yet, based on that conversation that you had, and then now me bringing this up, I think you have all the ammunition you'll need to try to convince them.
to rule the world.
Yeah, you could convince him, I imagine. You mentioned your band, and you have a background in music. I saw your website that you have, several CDs to your own credit. And we talked about how you produced some stories for public radio, and now Nocturne, the podcast. A lot of people that listen to the Podcast Digest are other podcast creators or creative types. For those listening and considering getting into any of those arenas, with your experience in all of them, how would you kind of compare and contrast what your experience have been in all these different genres?
Compare and contrast sort of being in music to being in podcasting?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of, what's the word? Maybe reception from your target audience, or sort of the creative satisfaction you might get from each, sort of all of those elements.
That's a great question. It's really different, actually. The way in which it's similar is that there's a great community of musicians in the Bay Area, and the community of radio makers I have found incredibly warm and welcoming, and kind of a close-knit but yet open group. And that's my experience of kind of the community of musicians that I've befriended and have formed my community with. The difference is that the world of music, gosh, more and more over the past several years has just become this beast, this unmanageable beast, and it's sort of just in disarray, and very difficult. It's difficult to kind of be heard above the fray. And with podcasting, I mean, I guess it's wild and unruly in its own way because it's kind of young still, even though it's been around for a while. It feels like there's a really loyal kind of big community of listeners. And I guess the way that people are finding podcasts now feels like the way I used to find music. I used to listen to the radio, and I still listen to CalX in Berkeley and find new stuff, but I don't listen to mainstream radio anymore. I don't find stuff there, and it's just hard. There's just so much stuff, and the major labels kind of just blew everything to bits. But the way people are finding podcasting, it's like word of mouth, and then people listening to their friends and asking people what they're listening to, and then there's kind of there's small review sites that are passionate, and so it kind of feels in that way almost nostalgic to me, but also really alive, and so it feels great, and it feels reminiscent of how music used to feel, but also really different because it's stories and it's a whole new arena. And so I don't know, that's kind of a long answer to your question.
Well, to kind of expand on that a little bit, you mentioned the differences in podcasting. One thing I've heard, and I'm a mobile DJ, that's very different in the sense of creativity, but just contrasting that to this in with podcasting, and tell me if you agree or disagree. I've heard this from others, that one of the unique things about podcasting is because it's so new, it is almost like that unstructured medium. There are really not necessarily any rules. Your show could kind of be about anything it wants. It's a fairly low barrier to entry. Nobody's going to tell you can't. And, if you've got hosting and you've got a microphone, you can put out something to the world that is just as accessible in that iTunes catalog as Serial or This American Life or what have you. It's there in there for someone to find. And there's a real freeing aspect to that to some others. But I would imagine in the music industry or even in radio, that's a different ballgame.
Yeah, it's a really good point because, I've been doing radio now for a while, and I don't know if you know about the transom folks in Cape Cod. I did a transom workshop last June with Rob Rosenthal, and they're really, really experienced, amazing radio people. So I feel really connected to the world of radio, and I feel like the standards I've developed or the standards I have in my mind that I want to meet are the standards of public radio, and the production values are amazing, and the journalistic integrity is fantastic. And so I feel like I have all of those benchmarks in my mind. But the really exciting thing about podcasting is you can definitely make what you want. And if you want to do a whole episode that's just crazy noises and somebody talk, you can do whatever the hell you want. And that's so exciting to kind of blend, the kind of creative and kind of production quality that I aspire to, but with, no limits and you don't have to be fair and balanced. You don't have to if you want to do something that's fictional, you can do something that's fictional. If you want to blend fiction and documentary, yeah, it's beautiful. It's amazing. And, I hope that I hope it stays as wide open. I mean, I think um, I guess that's coming back with a lot of, because the major labels are kind of not so much ruling the show anymore, at least in terms of the kind of music that I like. More and more people are just doing it indie and doing, what they want, how they want. But like I said, it's so hard to be heard. It's hard to find, for me, it's hard to find amazing music sometimes because I have to wade through so much. And right now, the field of sort of storytelling podcasts, which is the world that I'm trying to be in, there's lots of great stuff, but it's not so much that you can't find new stuff that that you're interested in.
And that has been, and I'll tell you, you're exactly right. The storytelling podcast is one that I got hooked on. I started the show September 1st, 2014, and through it, I've obviously found so many great podcasts. But before I started it, I'd never, short of maybe This American Life, I'd never listened to any real storytelling podcasts. And This American Life is probably more reporting or journalistic than storytelling, I would say. But through this, I have come across some amazing shows I would label as that storytelling genre. And now they are some of my absolute favorites. Yeah. And the appreciation for that production, for that end product is just overflowing in a way that two guys in a garage, it doesn't necessarily translate, or even for what I'm doing here. I mean, it's no comparison to what goes into it for some of the Nocturne episodes I've heard or some of the other great storytelling shows that I've now subscribed to. It's an excellent area of interest for me.
Well, thanks for including Nocturne in that.
Absolutely. And it was clear to me even before looking at your website that, you had, for lack of a better term, chops in the storytelling arena, because when I see an episode count that's usually around 5, I'm not necessarily expecting what any of you folks listening right now will go and subscribe to Nocturne, which I'm sure you're doing right now. You will see something that it doesn't fit with an episode count, right? So I really think that what you guys are putting out now presents itself so well and so polished that it would seem like this is something that you guys have been doing for years and years and years, and in some ways you have.
Thanks. And I should say, I sort of confused things way from the beginning because there's an episode 0. So there's actually 6 episodes.
6.
But one of them, the first one's kind of a trailer, but it's a 17-minute trailer.
I recall that one.
It's still paltry. Yeah, we have ways to go.
Which was also good too, because that was mostly you, if I recall, kind of explaining what you were about to do.
Yeah, well, the first one was called Welcome to the Night. And so it was like actually lots and lots and lots of different voices.
That's what it was, interviews.
And the next one, Night Owls, was a lot of me kind of in my house at night talking about what the nighttime felt like.
You know why I'm thinking that? I'm on your website. I did listen to, those were kind of like street interviews, right? With all the folks? Yes, yeah. I did hear that one, but I'm on your website and I don't see 0 on the website. It starts with 1.
If you look at recent episodes, it starts with 1. But if you scroll down to the very bottom, you'll see episode 0.
Gotcha.
What a stupid idea, right? I don't know why I did that.
No, I'm glad we brought it forth so folks can find it. They'll subscribe in iTunes probably anyway. So they're all there. I heard the street interviews one. That's for sure. You mentioned music. I wanted to touch on that just one more time. Are you still actively in a band producing music, or is that a hiatus right now?
Well, the band sort of comes together periodically in different forms. I still enjoy writing music, although most of my creative energy is going towards Nocturne right now. But I have a few songs that haven't made it onto a record that are newer, and at the rate I'm going, it'll be a few more years. But a good friend of mine just made me a new guitar, so
ooh.
I've got an impetus to get down to business.
You've got the motivation now.
Yeah.
A new toy. Before we go, I wanted to talk about the album artwork that you guys, episode artwork. It is so unique and memorable. And I'll tell you what, it did something that I think is exactly the purpose maybe intended to serve, right? When you reached out to me and told me about what you were doing, I went to the show, and the very first thing you see is the album artwork. And I was like, this is really cool. It's so unique, so memorable. What's the backstory there with that?
So there's a woman named Robin Galante, and she's a musician. That's how I know her originally. Although I didn't know her very well, and we were that sort of Facebook friends of people that you've met a couple of times maybe, but they're friends of friends. So I had just, she was on my feed and Facebook, and she was doing these beautiful posts where she dreams a lot and has these very vivid dreams. And she was posting the next morning, she'd wake up and she would just do these watercolors of her dreams. And this was just right about the time that I was getting ready to launch Nocturne. And maybe I sort of had done a soft launch, and I had gotten some stock photography from, Flickr or something. And I just thought this would be amazing. I think actually Kent also said, you should we should draw something. And I can't draw at all. And then I saw her work and I couldn't believe it just seemed perfect. And I wanted also not just the episode artwork, but I wanted the main artwork that would go on the website, on the homepage and iTunes. I had sort of sketched up this very rudimentary drawing of a possum, which is a nocturnal animal, in a street light. And I gave it to Kent, who's a much better artist. And I said, could you do something with this? And he did this pretty line drawing that, was a lot better than what I did. But I contacted Robin and I said, would you all be interested in this? Really, just don't put anything into it. Just listen to an episode and just, do something quick and dirty. And she was really interested. And I got together with her with the little drawing that Kent had done. And I couldn't believe it. She just captured exactly what I had in my mind. There was one thing, the possum's expression wasn't perfect the first time. It was a little bit kind of dopey and happy. And I said something like, I want it to be, simultaneously mischievous and, a little bit dark, but not menacing. And the next version, she just had it perfectly. So I think I hadn't talked to her yet about episode art. I just asked her if she would do the main piece. And once that went so well, I asked her if she would do the episode art. And she's been having a lot of fun. And I'm just kind of amazed because she'll just put, an episode on and listen to it a few times and let it kind of filter through her. And then she'll just send something. And the only thing about it is that I tend to work right up to my deadline because I'm trying to get the episodes out monthly. I realize I can't get her the episodes before they come out. So we kind of went back and forth about that. So yeah. So she, I said, what if you give me sort of a placeholder image and then, then take whatever you need to listen to the episode and do the art. So she did. She gave me this little moon. So when I put a new episode up, I put the little moon up and then I send the piece off to her, or I tell her it's up on iTunes. And in a few days, she has this amazing piece of art that's inspired by her listening to an episode a few times. And it's really cool to see what images she kind of gathers and what pieces filter through her, her unconscious or whatever. She's incredibly talented and really a wonderful person, really fun to work with.
Yeah, and the artwork really stood out and really is that eye-catching because it's so unique and different in iTunes and what I see in my playlist, across so many different shows that I subscribe to. It always stands out and it's always really interesting. And the main art that you're using, that you mentioned with the possum and the streetlight, it is absolutely the perfect one. It is one of those ones where I think about, an English class in high school could analyze this in terms of the subject matter. It's one, I guess your tagline, for lack of a better term, you've got, peering into the dusty corners of the night, and you've got almost a spotlight effect type thing on a nocturnal animal. And to go even deeper, one thing I thought was because it's sort of this watercolor style, it sort of evokes a certain youthfulness to the art, and there's kind of that shining a light on what some may think was, an innocent period of the day or night, if you will, and it kind of shows you behind the innocence, so to speak. And,
but also the fact that it's not, it's not always like a creepy dude in a raincoat in the spotlight. It might just be a possum, some of the mysteries at night are just mysteries, or they're not even, they're just interesting. It's not all, that's what I kind of love about this topic is that, a lot of it's not what normally kind of there's so many ideas or stories out there that are not normally what come to mind when you think of the night. It's, some of it's playful or, just unexpected. It's not all kind of strip clubs and drug deals. Right.
And that's one of the things you've definitely brought out in the first 6 episodes. And you've got a new one coming out very soon, I understand.
Yeah, I think in about a week and a half. I have a new one coming out, and this one is funny. At least I find it funny. I don't want to be too specific about it, but it's about a particular nighttime annoyance. Well, annoyance to some, and an absolute pleasure to others.
Oh, I'll be looking forward to it. That's for sure. As I will be for all the future installments of Nocturne. Are there any specific future plans for the show? I mean, you mentioned monthly. Is that sort of the targeted release schedule, or any thoughts of other formats or anything else that you've thought about?
Pretty much monthly is all I can imagine doing right now. At some point, if I partner up with someone to help me in some ways, that might change. But right now, monthly is great, because it's kind of this cycle where I become insane for a couple of weeks every month. And when I decided to embark on it, I committed to myself, because there's nobody else to commit to. I committed to myself doing once a month for 3 years, and then kind of evaluate where it is. So that feels really doable now, because I'm 6 episodes in, so it's half a year, and it's feeling great. So that's the plan with that, and I am right now in the planning stages of the 1-year anniversary celebration, which is going to be super exciting if it's going how I think it might go. And I'll say it'll be a live kind of participatory nighttime event with sound and movement.
Ah.
And it'll be in the Bay Area.
Oh, yeah. Interesting. I just thought of another question, Vanessa. I'll throw it at you. What are your thoughts, and not to pin you down on anything, or somebody quoting you back months from now, but a lot of the storytelling shows that we've been referencing that I've listened to are part of sort of a larger collective, if you will. Mm-hmm. Any thoughts or desires, or what are your thoughts in general on those type of collectives? And would you like to see Nocturne move in that direction at some point, or is it still too early to say?
That's interesting you asked that, because I was actually wondering if there was a way for me to introduce that topic. I actually am in a collective with some other really phenomenal podcast producers. Right now, there's 3 other: Jonathan Hirsch of Arrivals, Jacob Lewis of Neighbors, and Robert McGinley Myers of Anxious Machine. And we've formed this collective that we'll be launching officially very soon. So really, it's about other podcast producers that are doing, that are aspiring to similar levels of quality. Right now, it's all storytelling based, but in the future, it might be some other formats too. And it's cool. It's forming a community of other people to kind of do this with, and to help kind of cross-pollinate and figure out ways to get the word out without necessarily feeling like we're in a quote-unquote business.
Right.
Because all of us are coming from a place of just really loving doing this and really loving making radio and podcasts. And yeah, so in answer to your question, I am part of a group. It's a collective of podcasters, and it'll be growing and doing interesting things. Some of the stuff we're talking about is collaborative and exciting.
Excellent. Is there a website yet, or to be announced?
The name of the collective is The Herd, HEARD.
Gotcha.
Pun, The Herd. And I think that the website it's not live yet, but you'll be able to Google The Herd, the HEARD, and there'll be a link on my website and those other guys. It probably will be theherd.org, but I don't know for sure.
Well, for simplicity, folks, of course, the website for Nocturne, as well as Vanessa, will be in the show notes as well. So if you want to check out other great podcasts, especially if you're listening to this a little bit down the road, maybe, you will be able to go and click on through there and find those. Speaking of finding, and speaking of those websites, Vanessa, if anyone would love to check out all these things we've been talking about, where can they do that?
At nocturnepodcast.org. It's Nocturne with an E at the end. So yeah, nocturnepodcast.org. Turns out that's hard to say.
Is that the best place for them to find all of the other ones? If somebody wants to check out some of the radio documentaries we were talking about.
The radio, yeah. So I have this informal production company called Knitwise Media, and there's knitwisemedia.org, which is just where kind of a collection of my stuff lives. Also on PRX, which is Public Radio Exchange, which is an awesome resource. I think all of my stuff lives there at this point as well. And that's the radio sources for me.
And folks, all those links, as I mentioned, will be in the show notes, so check those out. And really, my full endorsement, ladies and gentlemen, check out Nocturne. Get subscribed. It's not going to bog you down or your subscription list once a month. You can handle that. Add it. I promise you will be happy that you did. Vanessa, thank you very much for joining me. This has been great to learn more about this awesome show.
Thank you so much. It's been great talking to you.
And folks, I want to thank you for listening to another episode of the Podcast Digest. I'll be back again next week with some more great behind-the-scenes information on a bunch of podcasts you should be subscribing to. Until then, my name's Dan Lizette. Have a good one.
Thank you for listening to the Podcast Digest. You can follow the show on Twitter at PodDigest. Like the show on Facebook at facebook.com/The Podcast Digest. Email the show feedback at thepodcastdigest@gmail.com. And you can find all the previous episodes and exclusive blog entries at the show's website, thepodcastdigest.info.